board meeting. The world's changed, hasn't it, since we last met? First of all, I do want to welcome a few new governors, Adam Seymour, Mark Clayton, Pete Chapman and Peter Holmes. You're very welcome. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
But I think it's important before we start in the main agenda of the board, of the council, that we just take a pause, really. In all the sort of activity that has taken place over the last 3 months, which we will get a strong flavour of today, COVID has cast a shadow over many of our lives at a personal level and at a professional level. And many of us will have experienced not just the frantic busyness of it all, but personal loss, whether that's the illness or indeed the demise of loved ones, friends, family, staff, colleagues. So I'd like you to join with me in just taking a moment's pause, and let's have a minute's silence just to remember those that we've lost and those special people that aren't part of our lives anymore. Thank you. So welcome to this Governors meeting. We are joined with by a number of guests and visitors, and so I particularly want to welcome Andy Weir, who's deputising for Joanna, Rashbal Kangora, who's on the call, and hi Rashbal from KPMG, who'll be taking us through the annual accounts, and also Wendy Tangan, who will be joining us from 2 o'clock to lead us through item 14, which is about the COVID risk for our Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff. So without further ado, we thought it was really important that we started this meeting with an opportunity for one of our governors, Jill Gallia, to share her experience of the supported living service and how they responded and indeed endured and experienced the impact of COVID on the residents and her colleagues. And so I'm really delighted that Jill's able to join us and to share some of their experiences. So I'm going to hand over to you, Jill.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Good. So I'm the operational manager for the Specialised Supported Living Service. For those of you that don't know, the Supported Living Service is a social care service that's hosted by the Trust, and we support 92 people who have varying degrees of learning disability and with additional physical disabilities and complex health needs that live in their own home. The Trust employs around 250 staff who work in the 16 teams, and we provide 24-hour care and support. The majority of the staff are BAME 3 support workers. So, going back to March, just before lockdown, we started preparing for coronavirus. We started by writing protocols, thinking about what we would need to do if people we support were needed to be isolated. We started thinking and writing support plans for people about how they'd want to be supported if during COVID. We were getting masses of guidance that was coming in from the government daily about changes in guidance all the time. And we quickly tried to pull all that guidance together and put it all in one place so staff were clear about what was expected of them. We started talking to families just before lockdown about, because obviously across the trust I think we'd already at this point probably closed to visitors, but because we're working in people's homes, we're not in a position to stop people from visiting. But we spoke to all the families and everybody agreed that they wanted us to close to visitors. They wanted us to make the homes as safe as possible. It was quite emotional telephone conversations that staff were having with families at that point, because some families were basically saying to us, we know we can't come and see our loved ones, please just keep them safe. We had staff receiving letters about shielding, some bank staff were cancelling shifts, some of our own staff were going off with anxiety. Luckily, we were able to sort this fairly quickly, and some of the things that were in place to help support staff were things like providing taxis. That really did help reduce anxieties for people that were travelling on public transport. We quickly got a good supply of PPE, which helped reassure staff. Occy Health and the psychology teams were really, really good in providing one-to-one support and advice for staff that were anxious, because while staff were coming to work, they were scared, they were apprehensive, but the support that occupational health and psychology were able to offer in just helping them with coping strategies, explaining that it's normal to have these feelings. I think all of these things did help us keep staff at work. Next slide, please. So this chart just gives you a little overview of our indicators of absence. I think we had around about 10 to 15 staff shielding, which again, if we bear in mind the workforce of 250 staff, wasn't too high. I think at the highest around April, we had around 25 or between 25 and 30 people self-isolating at the peak. I think we've had approximately around 15 staff who have had COVID themselves. We're now in the process of getting the results back around antibody testing, which is also interesting, and we're seeing a number of staff that have tested positive but weren't showing symptoms and didn't have time off. I think those numbers and figures will come out at some further point in the trust. We were really lucky that we had very little impact of staff that weren't able to work due to childcare. I think we only had a couple of staff that were affected by that. So again, I think for the size of the workforce, we did really well in maintaining almost normal staffing levels throughout the lockdown. Next slide, please. So then came our first positive case. Many of you may have read Lisa's story, that it's been shared, I know, on Trustwide communications and on Twitter. I think initially we were all in shock, but there's 4 ladies that live at Austhorpe Road, and the ladies and the staff were brilliant. The ladies very quickly were self-isolated, and they very quickly adapted to life in their bedrooms. They all have Disney Plus, and I think that all of a sudden being able to binge watch TV was a bonus. They quickly learned to ring down to staff with the food and the drinks orders, And I think you'll see from some of the pictures at the bottom that staff tried to make it as fun as possible for them. They made fake McDonald's, little picnic boxes for them, and I think the picture on the corner just shows the ladies actually celebrating when they came out of self-isolation, which seemed probably to go on for them forever, because as whilst there was only one person there that did have COVID, all of the ladies at some point got tested because they were showing symptoms. So just when we thought that they could come out of isolation, someone else got a symptom and they were back in the rooms again. There's a staff team of 12 people that work there, and out of that 12, 7 of the staff had COVID during the period. Covering the rota was tricky at times, but luckily it generally worked out that as one staff returned, another one went off sick, and staff were amazing, although as the theme throughout it all, anxiety does strike when you're faced with supporting people with COVID, but they all, other than when they were off sick themselves with COVID, they all came into work every day and did everything they could to make it as fun and as easy as possible for the ladies that were supported. Next slide, please. So we were approaching Easter weekend, and Stainbeck Road, a bungalow where 5 people live who have profound learning disabilities and physical additional health needs as well. Anthony, who lives there, he started with a temperature. The staff phoned the GP, and after doing some over the phone observations, the GP decided to call an ambulance. He went into hospital on the Thursday, and sadly he passed away the following Monday to COVID. This was probably the most distressing time. Nobody was allowed at the hospital, nobody was allowed in the ambulance. Staff struggled not being able to be with him. The ward staff tried hard, asking us about the things that he liked, but you know, we don't have people we support generally in hospital without support, and it was really difficult. The hospital were trying to understand him. They phoned me and said that they could tell that he was scared, he was crying, and what could they do to make it easier for him. We gave them all the information that we could around his favourite music and the things that they could talk to him about, and I think they really tried. It was before any of the guidance had changed around any visitors. It was really early days, and I think everybody was trying hard to understand how we support people with very complex learning disabilities in hospital, and it made us realise how important staff are for people when they're in hospital, when they have no verbal communication. Once again, the staff were amazing. Whilst dealing and hearing the news of Anthony, we had 2 other people that tested positive. So whilst they're dealing with the loss of Anthony, they also had to just get on and support the other people that were living there, while supporting each other as well. Patrick, who is pictured in the slide at the bottom here, he ended up being admitted to LTHT the following Friday. Once again, the staff had to watch him going in an ambulance by himself, which isn't something that would normally happen, and also Patrick being very upset that he was going to hospital by himself and almost begging the staff not to let him go. And it's difficult because obviously Leeds teaching hospitals, they're COVID wards, you don't know where the ward that people are going to, you don't get contact details, you're relying on them contacting you, which they do, but they're only able to give you one call, update call a day. The next day, we did get a phone call from the hospital to say that Patrick was particularly distressed and upset. He was pulling off his oxygen mask. So they did ask if we would be able to send staff to support him on the COVID ward. This was to try and prevent early intubation for him and move to critical care. Obviously, this was a new situation for us. It was a Saturday, but very quickly, the people that were on call, so Maureen, Cushley, Joanna, Linda, Rose, we got together, we had a telephone conversation and agreed that it would be the least restrictive option would be to try to get staff to go to the hospital and support him, which we had staff that were willing to do. The hospital created a bay just for Patrick and staff, so they were separate from other patients on the ward. So we did, at this point, we were starting to really work closely with LTHT. Patrick was in hospital for nearly 3 weeks. He has returned home, he has recovered, and that has been a real boost for the staff. The other person there that did have COVID was able to be looked after and cared for at home and has recovered as well. It was fantastic when Patrick returned home. The staff absolutely were over the moon. For Patrick, it's taken him time to rebuild trust with staff. He's had the questions of, why did you let me go? It was horrible, I was really poorly and you weren't there for me. And I think he's fine now. But I think there's a lot of work going forward when we're supporting people with learning disabilities, but some of the experience people have had, and when should they need to go to hospital again is going to be quite difficult. So I think we've clearly got some work that needs doing there. Next slide, please. So we'll move on to some positives. We had staff redeployed from across the organisation. Only around, I think, about 10 staff, but it did really help us. And I know that it's an area of mixed feelings and feedback, but we've had some really positive experiences, particularly from staff that were redeployed from Gender ID and from the lads team. There's been lots of skills sharing, lots of new learning on both parts. So where we have people from the lads team that have working diagnosing autism, they've had the opportunity to work directly with people with learning difficulties and autism, which they've found really beneficial, and they've also been able to share a lot of their learning with us. So that has been a positive. We have developed a lot of multi-agency working and partnership working, particularly with LTHT, and also with the LD liaison team that work at LTHT to make sure that we could get the best support for people when they were in hospital. And I think whilst the people that we had going to hospital were the people with profound multiple disabilities, so actually they were in wheelchairs, they weren't going to object to going to hospital, but we quickly recognised that for some people that we support that are particularly around challenging behaviour, that they would never, should they need to go to hospital through COVID, we would never get them in an ambulance without staff or support. And as an organisation, we worked with LTHT and Yorkshire Ambulance Service and developed a joint protocol that should we need it, that staff could go with the people that otherwise wouldn't be able to go, and started to put plans in place about how we would support them in hospital and cohort them if necessary on wards. Luckily, as yet, we haven't had to need it, but it was, particularly for some parents, it was definitely reassuring to know that we had plans in place should we need to. Joint working with other departments across the trust has been brilliant. The organisation and all the different departments have really jumped in to help us with many challenges that we faced. Because we're a service in the community, we generally get medication in sealed systems. Some of the chemists were unable to provide that service due to other demands, and so we very quickly had to pull a temporary protocol together so that we could safely administer medication from bottles. The Trust Pharmacy Department were really, really supportive and helped us with that. Again, the Finance Department, when we found that supermarkets were no longer accepting cash generally, and that's the way that that people we support get the shopping and the housekeeping, we needed to quickly put a protocol in place. The Finance Department were really helpful in helping us put a temporary protocol in place so we could use prepaid credit cards as safely as possible. Without things like that, we wouldn't have been able to do people's shopping. The physical health team really supported us with doing some quick training for staff on how to do observations and things, kind of like saturation levels, BPs, things like that, things that people had a bit of knowledge on, but not enough knowledge for what they needed to be able to support people with. We do have somebody at end of life care, and we've had support from people in the organisation to help us quickly get visitors guidance in place, so that whilst we weren't having visitors for that person, they were able to see family at a really important time. So I can't stress enough the way that people across the organisation really supported us and took the pressure off us at a very difficult time. Next slide, please.
Just a couple more minutes, Jill, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So we do have some learning. We've learned there's lots of bits of equipment that we could have done with, that we've relied on the professionals for. We've learned that technology is something that we aren't that good at, and we needed it to be able to communicate with GPs. Some of the GPs did give us iPhones so that we were able to communicate directly with them. Business continuity, I think that we could write a very good business continuity plan now with what we've learned. And that one of the important things is that the trust did try and keep things as simple as possible for us, which did make a difference and relieve pressure again. Next slide, please. So just to show some of the fun stuff that we did along the way, we did lots of different in-house competitions, so baking competitions, Easter bonnet competitions, scarecrow competitions, all things that really helped people feel and stay connected. I think in fairness to begin with, we were probably expecting an increase in behaviours and incidents, but I think the fact that the people we support, there was no pressure in place, so staff and no expectations, so they quickly relaxed. Staff weren't having additional pressures of needing to go out, taking people to appointments, so people just concentrated on having fun where they could. Next slide, please. So we also had Oliver, who is somebody we support, and he's provided some DJing across into the houses, so people have been able, another way of people staying connected. Next slide. And we've held lots of different celebration and theme days. from BE celebrations to World Culture Days, just different events. Like I say, they've just been morale boosters for people. And finally, the last slide, we received lots of free gifts, and I think it's really important to say that they were really appreciated by staff. You know, they were working in very isolated conditions, and they were good morale boosters for people, both people we support and the staff. In fact, I had the pleasure on most times of delivering a lot of them, to the point where if I visit a house now, it's what have you got for us today? So that I think it's just important to recognise that there were some good things that were happening at the time.
Jill, thank you so much. And I think, if I may, I'm going to bring Peter in a minute, but you know, on behalf of the board, certainly, thank you for everything that you and your colleagues have done to ensure that there's some sort of maintenance of the quality of life of the residents living in the supported accommodation, and the morale boosting work that you've done with colleagues and with partners. Really impressive. Peter, do you want to make a comment on behalf of the governors?
Oh yes, please. Yeah, just thank you personally, Jill, for this presentation, also for all the work you've done, clearly taking good care of our service users during this difficult time. And thanks to your team. Would you please pass our collective thanks on to them? We really do appreciate everything they've done. Do you think there are any other lessons we need to learn as a result of this? Can we do better for our service users?
I think that I'm sure there will be along the way. I think the important thing right now is, for us, it isn't over. We still, whilst we don't have anybody else at the moment that is positive, we are getting staff and people we support showing symptoms, and on a weekly basis we are still getting tested. And whilst lockdowns lifted, there's still a lot of anxieties about what that means for people. So I think there will come a point where we need some time just to reflect. We're still full on in a way, really. So I think there will come a time, and I'm sure there will be a lot more learning that we need to take on board.
We mustn't forget, ever.
Not at all. Thank you, Jill. Thanks, Peter. I think some of the issues that Jill has raised in terms of lessons learned, Sarah may well pick up in her presentation, and we can have a bit more of a broader discussion. Mark, I can see you waving at me.
I want to congratulate you on you being proactive. If there's a problem, you haven't waited for the people. You've solved it as a team. And that is really, really impressive. And you should take that on board and collect all your team. You know, to do something and resolve problems is a real positive step.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I think we solved it as an organisation as well. We didn't feel alone in solving problems.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to move us on to the main body of the agenda. So, Steve, you're waving at me.
Yeah. I suppose, again, just I'd praise Jill to what other people have been saying about the work you've been doing. I think the real positive for me that came out of that was about how you've been able to develop protocols about working in partnership and things. And for me, I guess one of the most distressing and alarming things that's come out of this, the way the pandemic has been managed, is people who've had vulnerable family members or people at end of life care, and they've not been able to go and visit them. I just wonder if there's any sort of lessons from the discussions you've had about working in partnership that could maybe be shared more widely and people could sort of build on, because if we do have a second wave, I guess that it is that thing about not being able to be with loved ones that is the most difficult part of it all.
Particularly harrowing issue that, isn't it, Steve? Jill, any reflections on end of life?
I think as an organisation where we've been supporting people at home, we have responded really well and put protocols in place so that family members have been able to spend time with people. I think we're working closely with LTHT, and it just has to be on an individual basis. I think that they have recognised, whilst we have things like hospital passports and things in place for people, we do need to, you can't underestimate the value of having a member of staff with someone. And we've got a good relationship with LTHT now. All we can do is continue build on it. I think everybody's have learned a lot over the last few months, but that has been one of the most distressing parts of it, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill. Clearly, really strong vote of confidence and praise from the Council of Governors, and there's some comments from other governors on the chat line as well. So thanks, Jill. You're sticking with us for the rest of the meeting as well, aren't you? Excellent.
I am, yeah.
I'm going to move us on to the main agenda. And for the sake of the minutes, we have a number of apologies for absence. So just let me run through those. In terms of governors, we have apologies from Tina Turnbull, who's a new governor, Mark Pierre Anderson, Sarah Layton, and Les France. We have also apologies from Andrew Moran, non-executive, and from the execs, Kathy Wolfenden, Joanna Foster-Adams, and Claire Kenwood. It would have been Claire Kenwood, her last Council of Governors today. Claire leaves as... I don't know the answer to that question, Nicola. Nicola's asked a question about, oh gosh, there's me, all scary and large. Right, that's your question answered, Nicola, thank you. It would have been Claire's last meeting today. She isn't leaving the trust, but she is stepping down as medical director at the end of this month. But she will be around as director of improvement. And at our next board-to-board meeting in September, Chris Hosker will join us as medical director. Many of you already know Chris from his work in the trust. The screen will just be the screen. I don't have the technical skills to change it, so we're looking at you, Jill, in all your glory at the moment.
More people.
I'll just keep it on the speaker view. I like to see everybody, and then I can see if anybody is trying to attract my attention. So
it's Cleveland. So I've just put a message up to say you can toggle between speaker view and gallery view, top right, and that gives you everybody or just the big one.
Okay. Right, I'll let people do what they need to do on that. Thank you. So those are the apologies for absence. We have a document around declarations of interest for governors, which we take note of. Any changes to any declarations of interest and any declarations of conflicts of interest? Does anybody want to declare any conflicts in respect of the agenda items today? Looking around, I'll take that as no. Any comments?
I'm sorry, Sue. I was trying to unmute myself.
Oh, sorry.
Just to say, I don't think it's really a conflict. One of my interests is that my son works for KPMG, and obviously we're hearing and he works in audit, not public sector audit, but I suppose just declaring that as we're hearing from KPMG today.
Thank you. That's helpful. We'll capture that in the minutes, Helen. Thank you. Kath, is there anything in relation to the declarations of interest you want to bring to our attention?
So I think it's set out in the paper if people have had a chance to read it, but due to COVID, we've paused sending everybody individual documents to update their interests. People have been doing it as we've gone along through the year. So what we presented is the matrix, which sets out everybody's interest as we know it. What we're asking people to do is just to confirm, and I suppose confirm by not saying that they're wrong, but just to confirm in this meeting that that they are currently up to date and correct. And we'll contact anybody that's not here outside of the meeting.
So if you have any amendments to make, if you could let Kath know, and otherwise we'll take it as read. And there's a message there from Rashpal on conflicts as well. Can I move us on then to the minutes of the last meeting way back in the 4th of February? For those who were in attendance, are there any inaccuracies that anybody has spotted? Just going quickly page by page. Page 1, wave at me if you know that there is anything. 2, Helen?
I'm sorry, I don't know which page it is because I haven't got it in front of me, but just to, it goes against Helen Kemp's comment. It says that I have a relative working for KPMG somewhere in the minutes. I don't. It was Helen, not me.
Right. Okay, we'll get the right Helen.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9. People happy with those as a record of the meeting that took place then? Great, thank you. Moving us on then to the action log. I think most of these are picked up in terms of either being ongoing or hibernated as per COVID, or they have been deferred to the November meeting of the governors, when we're hoping, if it's safe, that we'll be on the same room. So just let me double check. Page 2, the second item was around it's from last year's board to board, and it was around acute care excellence. Issues will be presented at the May 2020 council meeting. Obviously that's been postponed because of COVID. I just wonder when we might expect an update on that. Is that something we could have at the board to board in September?
We can certainly schedule that.
Andy, would that be reasonable? Yeah. Let's have that then, please. Right. The action that's got Claire Kenwood's name against it, can we follow that up, Kath, with Claire and do an out of the meeting update to governors?
Yep. Yes, we can.
On improving health.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think the other things are all either completed or updates have been provided. Is there anything outstanding on that action log that anybody wants to highlight? Okay, thank you. However many times you do these Zoom meetings, it never gets any less cumbersome, that bit. So thanks for your forbearance. Okay, so we've got the Chair's report, which has been submitted. I want to take it as read, but if anybody's got any questions on the content of that report, happy to take them. No, people happy to note that report. Thank you. Which takes us then to the paper 8.1, which is the annual members meeting update. Now, normally under normal circumstances, we'd be having our annual members meeting at the end of July. Guess what? Events have got in the way. So we've got to comply with expectations for foundation trusts and the submission of our accounts to Parliament. And there was agreed slippage in the deadline for that. But the paper 8.1 sets out our rescheduled time proposals for the annual members meeting. Kath, do you want to highlight what you would like the governors to consider and agree on, please?
Okay, so I think I hope it's all self-explanatory in the paper. As Sue says, we've postponed it until the 5th of November, and we're going to hold it in the context of the Council of Governor meeting. So it will be an hour-and-a-half slot rather than a full day, where we link it to the big conversation. And as governors will remember, the big conversation is not a statutory thing, it's something that we choose to do. But it's just not possible this year to run the two together because of current social distancing rules, which we can't possibly foresee will or won't still be enforced. So we've taken the decision to de-link the two of them and to hold a much shorter annual general meeting or annual members meeting. So we will still have the same format in terms of the day, in that there will be presentations from the Chief Executive, the Chief Financial Officer and the Lead Governor, and we will do all that we can to publicise this through our networks, with our members. We're going to send something out with our election documentation, because we're about to run some elections. So we're going to get as much interest as we possibly can. However, with an event which isn't linked to a big day where we get lots of people in the room, there is a potential for us not to be quorate. We will do everything we can to ensure that we are quorate, but our quoracy requirements are 10 members, and that of course excludes all of the governors who themselves are members who are in the room. We need other people to be there in order to make it quorate. And that's what our constitution says. So what we're asking you to agree today is that in the event of us not being quorate on the 5th of November, so we don't have to just postpone everything to the following week, which is what our constitution requires, we're asking you to agree in the event of us not being quorate to suspend that standing order and to agree to go ahead whether we're not quorate or not. So we can do all of this on the day, but I just wanted to preempt it really with governors and just get some support and sign up so that we have that safety net there should we need it. So that's the proposal.
Thanks, Kath. And there was a question on the chat from Ruth about accommodation for anybody who was still shielding in November. Yes, there will be opportunity for a virtual link as required. Does anyone have any questions or concerns for what Kath has outlined? I'm not seeing any, no. So are we happy to go along with those proposals? And Peter will be closely involved in the planning for that meeting. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's got to have a practical solution to these extraordinary circumstances. Lovely. Great, so we're going to move on then, and we're going to take the Chief Exec's report, which is a presentation, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Thank you. So hopefully we'll be able to get the slides up on the screen. Thank you. So I thought it was easier to do it this way because this is something we've been doing every week now for 15 weeks, I think it is, since we first went into lockdown. So I'm just going to take you through some key updates, if that's okay. If you've got any questions, again, just use the chat function. There's a lot of people on the call, so I'm happy to pause for questions at the end, but just let me get through the slides first because I'm conscious that you've also got a very full agenda for after I've done my presentation. So if we just go on to the next slide, please. So first of all, each week, and I think, you know, Jill has really brought it to life, the extent to which colleagues across our organisation and service users and families and members of our local communities and all of those that we hugely rely on, volunteers, local authorities and voluntary and community sector organisations, have just really pulled together over the past few months and helped us really keep a focus on the safety and wellbeing of staff and service users and keeping people safe from the risks of COVID. And that work is going to continue in terms of the future uncertainty that we face. Throughout of this, we established a Facebook group for staff that's now got a growing membership, and the feedback from staff using that is that's working well in terms of another form of virtual support, because the ways in which people would normally come together, they've not been able to do. And again, there's some great learning in terms of those different ways of connecting with each other that we want to retain for the longer term, especially when we operate over such a big spread of sites across Leeds and York and some of our regional services as well. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So just to give a bit of an update in terms of the national and the regional picture, you'll have all seen the extensive press coverage as the lockdown starts to ease. We just continue to be in a period of uncertainty, and the risk from COVID is still present. So we continue to remind all of our staff and those that we support of the importance of social distancing, hand hygiene, the ways to keep yourself safe from COVID. Each local authority has been required to produce a local outbreak management procedure. Those have now been done. We've got a health and wellbeing board to board on Thursday. Myself and some other board members are joining that, where we're discussing what the local outbreak plan is for Leeds. We do continue to get updated guidance and policies week by week, which have been challenging. I think Jill talked about that, keeping abreast of the national changing guidance and making sure that we implement it in the best and safest possible way for our services is really important. Antibody testing is something that has been rolled out. Not because if you get the test result, it should change any of your behaviour, but there's multiple studies taking place to better understand COVID as a virus and how that operates, and ultimately then what tools we've got at our disposal to keep people safe from it. And you'll see there, again, like me in the news, the local lockdown instigated in Leicester. Some really important ongoing work led by our Directors of Public Health to get access to timely data from all the testing that takes place. The majority of testing happens through independent organisations, and then we rely on that information being pushed back into the health and care sector. It's not like when we do testing on our patients, it goes straight to the lab at LTHT. We get the results electronically and very quickly so that we can manage that. And in the midst of all of this, just to reassure the Council of Governors, because I know this has been something that you've wanted to be kept updated on, the Interserve construction company were able to carry on with the build of the new Tier 4 CAMS unit at the St Mary's site and comply with COVID, and having visited there once and going again in a couple of weeks, could see how they were safely operating that site. In the next 2 weeks, the full steel frame will be up and all of the outer structures will be completed going into the autumn. So we are on schedule for that unit to open next year. If we just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So in terms of our trust news, and this figure will have gone up by now, we'd already had over 1,300 staff have the antibody test, and we're looking at in the region of about 12% of staff coming back as positive. That is varying across the country, so places in London are reporting figures as high as 35%. Over in the northwest, some places are reporting in the region of 20%. And all of this data is being collected nationally, again, as part of us trying to understand as much as possible about COVID. We continue to test all new admissions to any of our inpatient units. We test all patients pre-discharge to a care home. And again, following a recent change in guidance, we are testing all new admissions 6 days post-admission. And we continue then to operate our services in a way which is, until we get those test results, we have to cohort and isolate in order to reduce the risk of any spread. In terms of staff, the number of staff that have been off with COVID symptoms is at its lowest level yet, so there's below 20 staff off with COVID symptoms. However, we still have a significant number of staff who shield and other reasons for staff absence. So you'll know anybody waiting to go into the acute trust for an elective procedure has to self-isolate for 14 days beforehand. So there are lots of complexities in terms of keeping our workforce safe and maximising the number of staff that are physically at work. Test and trace service continues to be operational. Thankfully, in the last few weeks, we've not had any cases alerted to us through that route, and the requirements in terms of PPE continue as they were at the height of the pandemic, and will continue to do so. Visiting is now taking place across our wards, but must be booked in advance so that we don't have too many people attending at once. Just go to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So one of the things we've been really talking about is, as we go into the next phase, how do we organise ourselves and what's our priority? And the bit that we're just really mindful of is that we need to continue to develop and adapt how we're working, because we need to maximise the quality and the capacity of our services to meet the demand, but we've still got to do everything we can to keep staff, service users and citizens safe from coronavirus. And that's very much then encouraging our teams that have really been flexible, innovating, finding new solutions, to continue to do so, and not to feel as though they've got to wait for permission. But equally, at the heart of this is the well-being of our staff and making sure that those individual risk assessments are completed, that when people are returning to work, they're doing so safely. And it's a real balance. The one word we keep using is a balancing act against the different risk factors and demands. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So a big part of the work for the past couple of months has been, how do we enable more people to come back into trust premises in a way that's safe? So many of our staff will continue to work from home. It's not possible for all staff to return, and many staff do want that flexibility to continue to work from home. So we're doing it site by site to make sure that we adhere to the 2 metre social distancing, there's sufficient PPE, hand hygiene, etc. available at all of our sites, and obviously needing to adhere to the requirement around face masks. And a big change for the NHS and all of the public sector, when we've been for many years in an estate strategy which is reduce your footprint and encourage people to hot desk, that's not possible. And again, that just is a limitation then on the capacity of our sites. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So a particular focus on supporting Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. The staff wellbeing assessments are well underway. At the end of last week, about half of those had already been completed. The continuous improvement team are doing some evaluation work to make sure that this was co-produced from the outset, get feedback and learning all along the way. We are rolling it out to our bank staff as well. So we've just got some additional people in place to support that because we have quite a large bank. The Race Equality Network continues to meet weekly, and the Equality and Inclusion Task Group, which Claire Holmes chairs, meets fortnightly. And following on from the blog that Sue wrote a couple of weeks ago, this week there's another letter going out now to all staff, really reiterating as an organisation we want to eradicate racism and we want to be an inclusive organisation, and that's going to require everybody's commitment to enable us to achieve that. And if you've not seen them, they're on our website. Each week members of the Race Equality Network have been writing blogs, sharing their experiences of COVID, of mental health, from the lens of their family, their culture and their heritage. So a really insightful read, and one of the things we know, the more you can learn and understand about different cultures is really important in terms of being an inclusive organisation. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. Research and development has continued to be an important part of our ongoing work through COVID, and in particular then making sure that we are connected into all the research that's taking place into COVID, both in terms of, again, the virus, vaccines, etc., but also the wider societal impacts, psychological impacts, and the learning from those. So we're encouraging as many of our staff and service users to get involved in that research. The more research we can do, the quicker we can learn and hopefully find some other solutions that means that people will feel safer from COVID going forward. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. So one of the other pieces of work that we've been doing for the last few weeks is going out using our Your Voice Counts platform to get feedback from staff, really wanting to learn from the first phase of the pandemic, and those were some of the questions you're obviously asking Jill, of what their learning has been and what does that mean for organisation-wide learning. And again, this was a few days ago now, over 400 staff have joined. It's got a few more days to go, and then we're going to analyse the themes, and that will all inform the previous work we were doing on our culture collaborative. And it's from some of our approach to getting the culture right. We held last week a leadership forum with Professor Michael West, and we've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks with Margaret Heffernan, which is all about compassion, about how do you encourage innovation, how do you eradicate hierarchies that get in the way of people being able to get on and be creative and find the right solutions for them. All part and parcel of the work we've been doing for a long time now on creating that culture that we want it for everybody to thrive within. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. One thing that's really important that we try our best to do is just let everybody know how much we appreciate that they've done and will continue to do. Often myself, all of the board members like to get out and about to meet our staff in person and get feedback from service users. It's been really hard not doing that through COVID. But it's been the right thing to do because we need to keep all of our units safe and minimise the number of visitors. But we're all incredibly proud, as the board, we're incredibly proud of every single one of our colleagues. And normally each year we do the annual Trust Awards. So what we decided this year is you couldn't create enough categories in a way, again, that we would feel we were being inclusive. So at some point, when we are allowed a gathering of a suitable size, we will be holding a thank you celebration for all of our staff. But in the meantime, what we've also asked for feedback on is the money that we get donated through NHS charities. So at the last board meeting, we then subsequently held a trustees meeting. And so we've already had the first pot of money, and no surprises, all the ideas that the services have generated was predominantly about things to purchase for service users and for our inpatient units, which is great. But actually a lot of the people that you've seen on television are raising money because they want to say thank you to staff, and they do want that money to be spent on NHS staff. And our staff find it really hard to say, well, here's a good idea or something that you can spend that money on us for. So myself, I think it's Cleveland, Sue White, Claire Holmes, we're meeting in a few weeks, and we're just encouraging any ideas from our staff to come in, please, to make sure that that next wave of money, if there's something that staff think it would be really beneficial to spend it on, then we're open to all ideas. Just go on to the next slide for me, please, Rose. There we go. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions, Chair, if time allows.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Sarah. I hope that gives everybody a good sort of update on the bigger picture for the Trust. Just a word about timings. Rashbal, are you able to stay if we have a quick comfort break at 2 o'clock? You're able to stay for a little bit longer?
Absolutely, that's absolutely fine.
I don't want to rush the accounts.
No, that's fine.
Are there any questions for Sarah at this point? Peter? You're on mute, Peter.
Right, just a quick one. Some time ago, we mentioned the idea of a permanent memorial to the staff and service users who died through this. Have we had any more thoughts on that, what we might do?
No, we've not at the moment, Peter. A couple of suggestions have been made. And so what we said is when the time is right, we'll formalise some of those. I know, for instance, suggestions have been made around a bench or a place to go at the St Mary's Hospital site. So that's something that will certainly involve a wide group of people when the time comes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know on the chat, both Nicola and Ruth have commented on how much they valued the Wren blogs on the website and on social media. Can we make sure that the letter that goes about our commitment to our BAME staff is also sent to governors as well as all employees? I think it would be really important for governors to have sight of that.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Can I then invite Peter to give the lead governor report?
Yep, I'm unmuted again. Obviously, there hasn't been a great deal of activity in recent times at governor level. We did have our 2 question and answer sessions, which were very well attended. I think we had 15 governors attend one and 16 at the other, and lots of questions put and lots of questions answered. So thank you for that. After the first of those sessions, I did request from Martin Wright as our Senior Independent Director for an update on what our non-executive directors are doing during this period. And he did present us with a very comprehensive report, I felt, which was very encouraging. It certainly answered my questions, and I hope it did for all the governors. I've not heard anyone comment to the contrary anyway, so it seemed to answer that question. So is Martin still with us? So thank you, Martin, for that, and thank you all the Neds for bearing with us on that. We had our first opportunity to observe a board meeting on the 25th of June for some time, and I think there were 4 governors who did so. Some not necessarily for the whole meeting. So it's sitting there as an observer of a 3-hour meeting is not the easiest thing in the world to do, I would say, but it was certainly a good opportunity to get back into the swing of things and start hearing the various executive reports, etc. Also, very much along the lines of Jill's presentation today, we had a presentation from Carla, who's a sister at the Mount on the Female Dementia Assessment Ward, and that was a very touching account of her and their team's experience in carry on providing the service. So very, very, very similar to Jill's experience, I would say, and it just shows what fantastic staff we have to keep on under these circumstances. And if we could give all our staff a big hug, we would, but it'll have to be a virtual one for now. Getting back to sort of normality this week, we've started again the annual appraisal process for our non-executive directors. So Sue and I spent yesterday with 3 of our NEDs going through their appraisal and talking about their objectives for the next year. So that's a process that goes on to the end of July and culminates in Martin and I appraising Sue. So that's the grand finale of the whole thing. And we will report back to the November meeting on the outcome of those appraisals. But based on yesterday, it was, as usual, a very positive experience. And I think we are actually very lucky in the non-executives that we have on our board. including our newcomer that who is here observing us today, Cleveland Henry. That he was one of our victims yesterday and did very well as a newbie. So we expect great things of you, Cleveland. We look forward to that. So that's it really. I think apart from that, the next major task, as you heard, that befalls me is to be part of considering the annual members meeting and deciding what topics we can then squeeze into the Governor's Council meeting on the 5th of November. So inevitably, I think there will be some things that maybe have to wait, but there's nothing to say that, as individual governors, we can't have a conversation about that in the meantime. So if anybody has any thoughts on what should or shouldn't be included in the next meeting, then by all means, let me know. So that's about all I have to say for now. Thank you, everyone. Glad to see you all again, and can't wait to we're actually meeting in person in a room and have a chance of a good natter.
Thanks, Peter. I just wanted to add, just again for the sake of the minutes, a couple of formal items relating to governors. That Sally Rawcliffe-Fu, Jill Gallier, Mark Pierre Anderson and Kirsty Lee, potentially this is your last meeting. Can you believe it? It's just gone in the twinkling of an eye. But you're all eligible for re-election. So if we can persuade you with the requisite arm twisting, Peter, I'll leave that to you, to stay on, because you've made an enormous contribution over your time as governors, and we'd really encourage you to consider standing for re-election. And I'll let you reflect on that whilst we have a comfort break. So we'll have, if we could be back in 10 minutes at 2:20, and then we'll restart with Martin talking about the audit committee before Ashbal takes us through the accounts. Rather than coming out, if you could just put yourselves on mute and turn your cameras off, get a cup of tea, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes. Make governors aware that sadly Mark Clayton's had to leave us, and we have been joined by Councillor Anna Perrett. So Anna, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming. We've also been joined by Wendy Tangen, who's going to be leading us on item 14 and a wee while on the agenda. So welcome, Wendy, to the council. I think, bearing in mind the stuff we've got to get through before the end of the meeting, we might be working miracles if we can get it finished by 3 o'clock, but we'll be aiming for 3:15 at the latest for this main part of the meeting, if that's okay with governors, because there's some important stuff that we need to go through. So I'm going to hand over now to Martin as chair of our audit committee to talk briefly about the role of the audit committee and his role as chair before handing over to Rashbal on behalf of our external auditors. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sue. Hope everybody can hear me now. I'll take the hint and I'll talk as quickly as I can and get through this as quickly as I can. There is amongst the papers a report about the audit committee's work. So I'm not going to go through all 19 pages of that, but I will focus on two things. I'd like to take you through a little bit about what the audit committee actually does, because I don't think the name is terribly helpful. It doesn't give you much insight into the work that's done, and then just a few of the highlights of the work that we've done over the last 12 months. But before I completely dismiss the report, can I just say thank you to Kath Hill and her team for putting the report together. I don't take any credit for the wordsmithing of the document, though I do take responsibility for the contents. So thanks, Kath and your team for putting all of that together. So audit committee. Audit committee is one of 7 committees we have within Leeds and York. And as with any of the other committees, it's established primarily to support the board and to gather assurance outside of board meetings to bring back to a board meeting to support the work and decisions of the board. It's my pleasure to have 2 other non-executive directors work with me in the audit committee, Helen Grantham and Cleveland Henry, who are both on this call, and I think you've seen both already in the course of the meeting. I'm grateful for their help, but it's only right that I should say also thank you to Margaret Sentamu, who clearly isn't on the call as she retired as a non-executive director a short while ago, but for the time of the report that we're talking about here, she was a key member of the audit committee. So audit committee, why am I concerned about the name audit? I honestly don't think that the name audit is the right name for the committee. Really, it probably ought better to be called the governance committee, because primarily its responsibility is to ensure that the trust is governed appropriately and that it reviews the governance applied across the trust to ensure that the board has the assurance about the governance that it applies. That is both internal, that is the way the committees are structured, that is the way the formal business is done, but also external. So it's working alongside the external auditors, and Rashpal's here today, and you'll hear a little bit more about the work of the external auditors and the internal auditors, who do a lot of work during the course of the year on the internal workings of the organisation. We meet 5 times a year. One of those meetings is primarily about the audit, but the majority of the others are in a standard format where we gain assurance from executives coming to speak to us, from the external auditors coming to talk to us about issues we should be aware of, and particularly from the internal audit team with a regular update on the programme of work that the internal audit teams do, checking on everything that's going on within the organisation, not just financial, but also quality and performance. There is a long list on page 5 of the report, if you're interested, of all of the people who've come to talk to us over the course of the year. And in fact, what I'd invite governors on this call to do is to come and attend a meeting. We were delighted to have one of the governors come to attend the meeting during the course of the last year. We'd encourage anybody who wants to come and see the workings of the audit committee to come along and see us. So highlights of the year, well, Rashpal is going to talk about the audit, so I won't steal any of his thunder, but clearly clearing the accounts is an important part of our business during the course of the year and has to appear on that highlight list. Internal audit, we have to agree a programme of work by the internal auditors to ensure that we cover all of the relevant bases during the course of the year. So a very important part of our work is to ensure we have agreed to that programme of work, and that is on a rolling 3-year programme. So we do have to keep a pretty close eye on how that works. We had a couple of particular issues that are listed in the report. We had the health and safety executive come to see us as a trust back in October of 2018 and again in February of 2019. And so following up on some of the health and safety issues that were raised and for us to review has been on our agenda. And of course, we had the fire at Becklin, which required the West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service to come and review our procedures, and the follow-up on that was something we also wanted particularly to keep an eye on. So I think those are some of the particular things that have happened this year that are out of the ordinary. So I think that's perhaps all I wanted and needed to say. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I will leave it there in the interest of saving us some time, Sue.
Thanks, Martin. Shall we invite Rashpal to talk us through the accounts, and then we'll open it up for questions if there's anything on the mechanisms of the committee or indeed on either of the reports.
No problem.
And as if by magic, there are the slides. Rashpal, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So Martin's talked through the annual report, and important document as part of the annual report is the annual accounts, which contain the numbers in terms of how much income you got, how much you've spent, what your asset base is. And I principally have two responsibilities. I normally talk to you about three responsibilities, and there they are on the slides there. And I should say that the papers in the pack are not the slides you've got here, but the papers in the pack are the actual audit document I signed to say I'm happy. And I'll weave that through this presentation, because I don't think that's an actual very helpful document. It's quite a legalistic document, but whereas this is probably tells you my responsibilities and the outcomes of our work. So the first area of responsibilities are around, if you like, the numbers within the financial statement and whether they give a true and fair view of your performance during the financial year and your financial position at the end of the financial year. So we've done our audit work in accordance with international auditing standards and what is expected from us by the National Audit Office as well. And we're happy that where those accounts give a true and fair view of the financial performance of your trust. This year's audit was done under difficult circumstances. We had to do it remotely. And I mean, one of the things I do need to draw out is the fact, the accounts which you presented, we challenged back to officers regarding the numbers, so Dawn and her teams, and we got the evidence we were needed to satisfy ourselves that those numbers were correct. And other than a very few minor presentational changes, we were happy with the numbers as presented, and we issued a clean audit opinion. So a clean opinion means we're happy that they gave a true and fair view. The second area of our responsibility regarding value for money, and it's important to kind of say what we mean by value for money, because I'm conscious it conjures up different images in different people's minds. What we don't do is look at how you spent every pound and pence. If we did do that, we'd be here a very long time. Our audit fee would also be a lot higher as well. What we do is we look at your arrangement. So when you take a decision, that follows an arrangement. It follows, you've got certain processes in place. You consider risks. So we look at your risk management. We consider your risk management processes. We consider your corporate governance arrangements. Towards the end of the financial year, you had some changes to those arrangements because of COVID. We considered those to see whether there's any significant impact on the work we needed to do to give a conclusion. Now, the only risk that we identified, as we have at basically all of our NHS audits, is around financial sustainability, but we're happy with the arrangements your trust has put in place to manage the difficult financial situation that you have, that all NHS Foundation trusts have in terms of financial sustainability. So we're able to give a clean value for money. So we're happy in all significant respects. The trust has put in place proper arrangements so you can take properly informed decisions because you've got that decision-making processes. You plan to achieve sustainable outcomes for the taxpayers. So you consider your financial position when making your decisions regarding resource deployment as well. The third area which we would normally report on is quality report. Now, because of the outbreak of COVID-19, and the Department of Health made some changes, and one of the changes was we were no longer for 1920 required to do an assurance report over your quality report. And this is, if you recall, we look at your quality report to make sure it's got the information it should have in. We also consider the two indicators which we're mandated to consider. So we haven't done that this year as instructed by Department of Health. And we're supposed to look at the indicator which you select, but again, that's not happened because of the change in instructions. All indications are, we'll hopefully, and touch wood, I say this, everything's back to normal next year, and we will be in a position to do that work, provided the Department of Health, and it's certainly the feeling I'm getting is, yes, it'll be back to normal this year in terms of getting an assurance report. So, in terms of the work, that's the scope of our work, and that's at a very summary level, the opinions that we're giving: clean financial statements audit opinion, and a clean value for money conclusion. If you just want to flick onto the next slide, I think, the next two slides just take you through in a little bit more detail around some of the things that we consider. I mean, and I've talked you through about the risks and the findings on each one of those, but more than happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thank you so much. So colleagues, any comments or questions on either Martin's comments on the audit committee or indeed on the accounts? Dawn, can I ask you, as the finance director, is there anything that you would want to say in the mix?
I know, I think it's all been covered, Chair. Thank you. I mean, I suppose I just want to echo Rashbal's point. It were a very difficult year to complete the audit, and on both sides, it's back to that teamwork. Again, everyone did a really good job to get to the place, and obviously I'm pleased we got a clean bill of health through the process. So yeah, that's all I'd want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can I?
Yeah, certainly. Peter.
There is a question that Ruth sent through about can we change the name of the audit committee? Sadly, we can't change the name of the audit committee. It's a legal requirement that we have an audit committee, and so I'm afraid we have to stick with that name. Can I just say as well, as Dawn's just come in, one of the things I perhaps should have said, but I will now take the opportunity to say, is thank you to Dawn, who's a regular attendee of our meetings. And you may have missed Rashpal saying that we got a clean bill of health on our accounts and finances, and that's down to a lot of hard work from Dawn and her team in getting those accounts into that state. So well done to Dawn and her team.
Thanks, Martin. And echo that for the thanks for Dawn and her team as well. Peter, you were waving at me, Peter.
Just a couple of quick questions for Martin. One was following up on the question asked about fraud last year. I noticed in the audit report that the local counter-fraud specialist service attend all of our meetings, and they mentioned that they've worked on a number of cases during the year. Without going into specifics, could you give us an idea of how many cases and what kind of value are we talking about?
Okay, Peter, we do indeed get a representative who comes from the Audit Yorkshire team, who comes to talk to us specifically about fraud. They are in touch with equivalent people and teams around the country who gather information about any fraud that's been found in any NHS organisation. And part of what they do is to come to us to say, these are the things we've found elsewhere, to make sure we can then check to see whether there's anything relevant to us or actions that we might take to avoid any of those. Now, there were some issues, fortunately, in other trusts, which were quite significant, often to do with procurement issues. We were able to confirm that those issues did not apply to us, and so I'm comforted that we are having that regular update and can get that feedback.
Okay. Thank you. Secondly, in our pre-meeting, we talked briefly that there are a number of areas where we've done things differently during the COVID crisis, either by necessity or just to save time. Is the audit committee going to pick up on some of those things and look for where we can maybe make permanent improvements? And one of the areas we discussed particularly was cash, you know, whether we could eliminate or reduce the cash in the organisation.
Okay, yeah, well, in fact, it's a good point you raise, Peter, in that given that we look after governance, and that's our specific responsibility, governance was a major issue, of course, during COVID, because we had to change the arrangements that we would normally apply for governance. And the audit committee specifically had to satisfy itself that those arrangements were appropriate to the circumstances. And indeed, we're going to have to continue to review, as we come out of this situation, the proper development of that governance to keep pace with what's happening within the organisation. So yes, we have certainly been doing that. As regards things like the cash, the audit committee has a sort of oversight role, but it doesn't make specific executive decisions about those sorts of issues. But perhaps I could invite Dawn to see whether there is anything that was in the executive's mind on this issue.
Peter, did you? Thank you, Martin. Were you meaning the use of cash from a transactional perspective?
Yeah, either we discussed that very often it's necessary to have cash for patients, and that's fine, but also that some of our administration teams rely on cash maybe, and might be a chance to eliminate it there.
Yeah, so I think again it's back to the learning from COVID and around cash transactions and what you can do differently. And as Jill alluded to in her early presentation, thanks for noting financing that, Jill. You wouldn't have thought we could have done what we did, but we did do it, and we did learn and adapt. So as long as you've got the right controls wrapping around things, you can do almost anything. So we will look towards, depending on what clinical teams want and need, because people like to have access to ready cash, for things like a pizza night or whatever they might be doing. I don't know. So yeah, we will look at reducing transactional cash, but within rounds of what people need and want.
Yeah. We were thinking of the costs of managing cash.
Yeah.
Well. It's quite expensive.
Sometimes debit cards and the alternatives can actually, purchasing cards, etc. can yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Just probably you're the best person to answer, Dawn, but we had a bit of a dip in revenue compared to the previous year. And yeah, we seem to have increased our services. What was the main reason for that?
It's because last year, and it seems a long time ago now, Peter, we had a non-recurrent massive boost in our cash because we had the PFI transaction where we refinanced the PFI, and we got £6.5 million for that, and the 20 million provider sustainability. So that really was an artificial boost. So year on year, if you take that out, we have grown as an organisation. Yeah.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin and Rashbal, for that clarity and for that clean bill of health. Are we happy then to receive the auditor's report and to note the information and assurances provided? Lovely. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay, Rashbal, but if you have to go somewhere else, that's equally fine.
I'll stay till 3 o'clock. I do have another meeting at 3, if that's okay, and I'll drop off then. Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to item 13, which is the Trust's annual report update. Kath.
Yes, thank you. So we seem to be talking about lots of annual reports in this meeting, don't we? And this one is the Trust's annual report, which is a large document governed very much by a manual which is issued each year. And it's fair to say, as with very much everything else that we've been doing this year, COVID had an effect on the content of the annual report, not just because we had to talk about what we were doing in relation to COVID, which occurred right at the end of the financial year, but also because NHSI agreed that they would reduce the burden on managers in what they had to produce, and that created two changes for this year. We didn't have to do a performance analysis section. We also didn't have to incorporate the quality report, and Rashpal's spoken about the quality report. That's being done under a separate timetable a bit later in the year. So the Trust annual report has been produced, it's been audited, it's been to the audit committee, it's been to the board, and just in the last few days has been to Parliament. And I can say that whilst in the paper I wasn't expecting to be able to tell you, only yesterday we received confirmation that that has now been laid before Parliament. So we've jumped through all the hoops that we need to with that. The next stage will be to present it to the Council of Governors, which we normally do in the July annual members meeting, but of course we will do that in the November annual members meeting. We can make full copies available for you. It is a couple of 100 pages long, so we'd ask for people to have that electronically if at all possible, but we can print copies. But they will definitely be available if anybody wants to read that. But I am also advised by the communications team that in time for the November annual members meeting, there will be an annual review produced. So that's a much more accessible and easy read document with some of the information from the annual report, which is incorporated into it. What I have done is provided a summary for you, which is Sue's and Sarah's opening statements, and that was really just to give you a flavour of the highlights in the report of the year. It's fair to say that the only reason at the time of writing the paper I was allowed to do that is because until the document is laid before Parliament, it can't be issued in public. So it's here for your information. I was just asked to provide an update of where we are with the annual report, and that is the update.
Thanks, Kath. So are there any particular questions for Kath in relation to what she's outlined? That's fairly self-explanatory. We're asked to note the procedure and also the next steps, so we're happy to do that. Before we move on from governance, I also would just like to say, as Martin has extended an invitation to governors to come and observe future audit committee meetings, we will drop you a line with when those audit committee meetings are scheduled for. And as things evolve, we'll let you know whether they are going to be Zoom meetings or real physical meetings, so you can organise diaries accordingly. Thank you. Great. We heard in both Jill's introduction piece and Sarah's report about some of the issues that we are working as a trust together on around the needs of our BAME staff and service users. And it's particularly great to be able to welcome Wendy Tangent to this Council of Governors to say a little bit more about not just the risks facing our BAME staff, but also some of the work that the REN network and within the trust that we're doing to try and acknowledge and recognise those issues and work together to resolve them. So Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you guys what we've been doing in the last few months. As you guys aware that since the lockdown, there have been a growing concern in relation to the effect of COVID on BAME communities, with a significant amount of deaths with frontline staff and people becoming also seriously unwell. And we know that the science community hasn't ruled out genetics as a cause, but we do know that underlying health conditions, gender, age, as well as social-economic factors do influence the impact on BAME communities. And most recently, the Public Health England report suggested the racism and discrimination that sort of impacted even further for BAME communities. So therefore, our Workforce Race Equality Network much earlier on began to meet on a more regular basis. So we've been meeting on a weekly basis. And the purpose of our network, as you see, is actually outlined on the slide here. The reason we actually wanted to get together on a more weekly basis is to support BAME colleagues and also the wider trust to understand the experiences that people were having, but also to ensure that they were getting the right support. As part of the network, we are also very much involved in the regional West Yorkshire and Harrogate partnership of networks. And also we are very much involved nationally as well. And we were able to share some of the learnings from our network into these areas as well. Some of the areas that were, of course, concerned much earlier on was in relation to PPE. Also, communication, engagement, and leadership was the themes that the National Network of Networks actually outlined. And as a result, we ourselves tried to, within our own network, understand what was impacting staff here. So in the next slide, you would see that our BAME workforce express very much heightened anxieties, constant worrying, sleep deprivation, and a lot of specific psychological issues in relation to bereavement, loss, not just within the trust itself with service users and colleagues, but also within their wider community. And I think one of the things that was really important to notice, our workforce, our BAME workforce is part of our local community. And we can't see both in very, very separate. There was a lot of concerns also in terms of how we would support staff members to work more flexibly, and also support them with reasonable adjustments to their
Are you
work.
all right? Did your battery die?
So
are you all right? Are you able to?
So one of the
thank you.
So one of the things that we've done within the network, as we have, as in the national guidance in terms of PPEs, and as we learned more about COVID, some of these anxieties has lessened, which is really good. And the network members have taken a more active role in terms of their engagement with the organisation to support learning, but also to have an input in terms of decision making, and escalated their concerns via the COVID Equality and Inclusion Group that's chaired by Claire Holmes. So a number of issues staff members raised were dealt directly by the COVID Equality and Inclusion Groups, and actions were put into place. The formulation of the staff wellbeing assessment also supports staff in actually ensuring they get the right support, but also the members of the network gave an input in terms of what the shaping and the way in which the questions should be formed in asking BAME colleagues, which was really helpful. They also took part in a number of other work related to the organizations in relation, and that included BAME blogs, which talked about their own cultural experiences via COVID. We also put a video together inviting the wider organization to actually be part of our group. We inputted into the lifting of the Section 17 leaves. We've also contributed to a video of the staff wellbeing assessment and how these questions should be asked with managers. And like I say, we also inputted locally, regionally and nationally. And these are some of the things that we've actually done. Our network members have now increased by 55%. We now at 135 members, which is really good. We are having conversations that we wouldn't normally have in an everyday working environment. So this is really good to give members the opportunity to have that space to reflect and to have very much open, honest, raised conversations with each other, which allows for the shift in culture and how we work together. So that's actually proved to be quite useful. At our last meeting, we've now stepped down the meeting to a fortnightly basis, and the conversations are beginning to change. So we are getting back to our business, which is the workforce race equality standards and conversations and actions that will actually support the improvement of this agenda. Also, the network members have attended the BAME forum that Sarah and Claire actually chaired, which allowed to understand what they were saying that was being taken seriously, and the trust has now openly declared their commitments to supporting some of the agendas that was, or some of the issues that's raised by the network members. So it's pretty positive. In relation to service users, this is not necessarily involved with the network, but part of my day job. And one of the things that we are doing within our own team is getting blogs and video blogs and recordings of BAME service users and their experience via COVID. So we've already captured 3 stories, which will be coming out soon, that will actually sort of give a good account as to how people's experience have been. And we're working very closely with the community. I'm also a member of the BAME hub in the local community as well. So we are looking at the priority areas in terms of what we can do to improve the experience for our BAME community, as well as how that then influences their health and well-being. So we'll feed that into the mental health aspect as well. So that's kind of where we are at. So any questions?
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you for that. So I'll open it up for any questions. Peter.
Yes, I don't know what a Section 17 leave is. Forgive my ignorance, but I'm a new governor.
That's perfectly acceptable. Wendy.
Yes. Yeah, so it's Section 17 leave. So people whom, or service users who are placed under the Mental Health Act, in order for the, of the Mental Health Act, i.e. Section 3 or Section 2 or Part 2 of the Mental Health Act, which is the detentions from custodial detentions. In order for they to have leave, there's an agreed protocol, there's agreed contract between service users and the MDT in terms of how they would use leaves away from the ward or away from the hospital setting. So that is referred to as Section 17 leave.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Wendy? Nicola.
Hi there. Thank you, Wendy. That was really helpful and very interesting. And in the weekly briefings, Sarah's been focusing quite strongly on the work that you and your team have been doing. And it sounds like a lot of the execs have been involved in. So that's been really encouraging. I've just got a couple of questions and you can answer these briefly, I hope. One of the things that we read about is that maybe our BAME staff are less confident to challenge and maybe feel that they have higher experiences of bullying and harassment. I was just wondering if you're getting any feedback on that and if you might remind us of what our latest staff survey shows on that when you look at the breakdown by BAME staff. And the second point was, I think we've seen in the performance report that quite a lot of new referrals are coming through and that obviously we're expecting a growth in number of new service users and perhaps in acuity. I'm just wondering whether we're seeing anything different in the breakdown, the ethnic breakdown of those new service users that are coming into our service.
So in relation to your first question, and does BAME staff members find it difficult to speak up when they are experiencing discrimination or bullying and harassment? And the answer to that is yes. A lot of BAME staff members would say that that is the case. However, definitely our data also suggests that that is the case, and also our data suggests that a lot of BAME staff members, in comparison to our white counterparts, do go through a disciplinary process as well. But what's positive in relation to how we are moving forward with this is that the the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian ambassadors are going to be introduced, and these are ambassadors who will be representative of the workforce, which includes BAME members. So there's an additional support for staff members to actually share their experiences. And also we are looking at the disciplinary process in terms of how that matrix is used to ensure that staff members do not go through a disciplinary process unnecessarily. So it's the actual complaint or the actual concern is looked at much carefully from much very earlier on position, so that whether there's different avenues to be taken, i.e. mediation, etc., or how we support staff members at a much earlier on stage so that they feel able to speak up. The network itself allows for a safe space. We encourage peer support within that network, and we have a lot of white allies who are part of our network. So it's a race equality network, not a BME or BAME network. So that actually supports the change and shift in culture. And when we, as an organization, is beginning to have these open conversations with each other. So that's something is definitely shifting, and we can see that's shifting in relation to the recent conversations being had within the network. In relation to our service users and our service users coming through in terms of referral, i.e. people from BAME backgrounds coming to our service via Mental Health Act detentions, that hasn't changed much, but that is something that's being addressed. And with the recent appointment of the clinical engagement access and inclusion coordinators, specifically one to the CRIS team, one to the perinatal team. We also have a very experienced worker within the community and inpatient. And we also, I've recently learned that monies are actually being obtained for someone in the eating disorder team as well. So I think these are things, these are positions, or these are roles that will actually support the organization to look at the data much more closely, but also in how we engage our community, our local community, and also how we support our colleagues, our other wider services, to actually look at the cultural lens of how we deliver care for our patients. And one of the things that we are definitely considering is cultural competency training. That is something that I'm actually putting together for staff members as well. And that's a live conversation that we appear to be having now, considering COVID's allow us that opportunity to think about these things a little bit more focused, I guess. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. Helen Grantham, I wondered if you would just like to say a little bit about the Workforce Committee, because I know, having observed your recent meeting, this is a newly established subcommittee of the board that Helen chairs, with Andrew Moran as the other NED involved. But this is clearly an area of focus and scrutiny that the committee are looking at. I just wondered, Helen, if you'd like to say a little bit about that.
Thank you, Sue. Yes, and thank you to Wendy, who came along to our last virtual meeting and shared similar, but also inputted into some of the thinking. So yes, just to assure governors, part of our terms of reference is to gain assurance around our trust's work on equality, diversity and inclusion. And we have as a standing item on our agenda as well. And Caroline Bamford, as the trust's equality manager, equality, diversity and inclusion manager, also attends as a standing member of that committee. So it forms part of every conversation we have, actually. And I think it's obviously an area of focus that we will continue to build on. I was also going to say, and went through my head as also a member of the Quality Committee, and I won't speak for John, but in terms of service users, we are regularly having the conversation as we look at the individual reports from services about their service. How do we engage and ensure that nobody's left behind is a fundamental part of what we look at from a quality point of view as well. And I think therefore some assurance for governors that I think we are triangulating all of this and also trying to join it up, because fundamentally it's everything we do and it's everything that all of us do. So that's where we come at it from.
Thank you, Helen. Peter asked a question around cultural competency training for governors. Kath, can we pick that up as an action? And if you could liaise with Wendy as to when the right time for that might be, we'll certainly put that on your agenda.
Yeah, we can. We've a discussion, I think tomorrow or Thursday, about the training programme. So yes, we will certainly pick that up then.
Okay, thank you. I think in light of how important this issue is, both as a risk to our service users and for our staff in terms of the public health issues, but also issues around structural racism, microaggression and unfairness. Can I propose that we have this as a standing item? Certainly as an update at our November meeting, and then seeing as how we're progressing, maybe consider it as a key action in the Governor's annual work plan for next year. Would that be something that governors would welcome? Getting a lot of nods. Great. Well, we'll make sure that happens. Wendy, you're very welcome to stick with us for the next few moments as we conclude the meeting. But if you need to be off, that's perfectly understandable. Thank you very much, though. Thanks, everyone. We're going to move on then to item 15, which is the Service Performance Update Report. This and the executive summary sets out that there's been obviously a lot of transition in relation to COVID, but also in terms of the electronic data recording through the introduction of Care Director. And so this is an abridged performance report. Nonetheless, it gives a flavour of some of the issues that we are dealing with as a trust. Andy's here deputising for Joanna. So I suppose I'll open it to governors. Is there anything that anyone wants to particularly ask about in relation to the content of this report? Okay, Peter Webster? You're on mute, Peter.
Sorry about that. Just a little bit more explanation about the reason for the increase in out-of-area placements. what was behind that.
Okay, thank you. Out of our replacements, Andy.
Thank you. So in part, it's important to remember that at its peak, we took out 22 acute beds in order to create capacity for COVID shielding and COVID cohorting. That figure's reduced now, but at most we lost 22 beds. So unfortunately, that's clearly reflected in out-of-area bed use. Our trend in terms of referral for admission only slightly dropped. So actually, referral for admission has been pretty steady all the way through, but the number of beds available to us. That said, within the last month, we've seen a significant increase in referral to admission. Frankly, we've seen a significant increase in referral to almost everything within the last month, but particularly to our crisis teams, to our home treatment teams, and for inpatient beds. But that's not just happening here, that appears to be something that's happening locally. So at the end of last week, for example, there was no available national acute bed anywhere for an acute admission, either in the private sector or in an NHS provider. Simply the system was full up. So we are certainly at the moment dealing with a significant surge in referral for inpatient admission. But the big issue in terms of out-of-area provision for us has been the reduction, a temporary reduction and longer-term reduction of beds in order to create capacity for cohorting.
Thank you. Andy, are you able to say a little bit more, one about, just to explain to governors what cohorting means, and also what the prospect is of the reinstatement of those beds?
Certainly. So one of the things that we realised we had to do quite early was create space where people with acute mental health needs who also had COVID or were suspected of having COVID could be safely nursed. And essentially that has a requirement for isolation. So either someone needs to be kept separately, and you might imagine for some folk with acute mental health needs, that's quite tricky. Keeping them in a room and persuading them that they need to stay there is not always the easiest thing to do, frankly, when someone's acutely unwell. But also we had some spaces where we identified areas where a few people who we knew had COVID could be kept together if needs be, and were able to be slightly more mobile and have more space to move around. We did that in a number of sites. So we created 10 beds in the Beckland Centre on one of the acute female wards, which would be able to manage women and men actually, who had physical health needs as well as acute mental health needs and could be isolated in bedrooms. We also created in the CAU, the Crisis Assessment Unit, an area where people who would be challenging to isolate could be safely managed. Because we expected that we would see some of that. In actual fact, we saw very little of that. We've only used that function twice in the whole time for people who were really unwilling to stay in a bedroom and unwilling to comply with the isolation requirements that were needed. So this was about creating additional space or separate space for people who either have COVID or people who we suspected had COVID but needed to be isolated whilst they were undergoing the swabbing and testing. Now we have closed those 10 beds, we've reinstated them in the Beckland Centre, so actually that they're now back to being part of the normal female acute admissions ward. The CAU is currently still only available as a COVID area, but we're reviewing that in a meeting following this afternoon because we need the beds. The pressure on our beds is significant at the moment. So actually on balance, we think we probably need to reopen those beds. And we had some beds that we emptied in one of the acute admission wards at the Newsom Centre. We reinstated those about 2 weeks ago as well. There are currently 2 beds in the intensive care unit that are being kept separately for COVID purposes, and we have a ward at the Mount in the Older People Service that's designated as an assessment and intensive support area for people with COVID. Again, we're reviewing that at the moment in terms of whether or not that's the right thing to maintain and how we would reinstate that if we needed to use it quickly.
Thanks, Andy. I think it's important that governors have a sense of the rapid and real current decisions that are having to be made. So thank you for that, and thank you to all your team for all the work that's going on nearer the front line around this area. Are there any other questions in relation to the performance report from governors while we have Andy? Helen Kemp.
I just wondered, so you had allocated all those beds for COVID beds. Were they used? Were they needed?
In part, they were. So certainly at points in time, we've had, as I say, a couple of patients who have needed to be in the CAU because they've struggled to manage the isolation requirements. So we've had to keep them separate. We certainly at one point had 5 people in the women's beds at the Beckton Centre who had COVID, and at the Mount we've had up to 5, but generally around 2 to 3 people at any given time in the beds. The PICU beds certainly have been used. At one point we had a significant number of people in the PICU who had COVID, and actually we were having to move people around quite a lot to maintain infection control at that point in time.
And if we reinstate those beds then, what happens if you've got people then with COVID? Have you got a plan to revert some of the beds back quickly? Or
we do. We're working with Nicholas Sanderson and the infection control team very closely in this, and our principle is still that we can admit people and isolate them generally where we need to. So actually we would treat that as a routine management of infection. However, the reality is if we had an outbreak of COVID, we would need to reinstate some of those beds. And that's part of the reason that we've staged the reduction, frankly, in order to work out how we best do that.
Thank you. There's been a lot of stars throughout the course of the last 3 months, right across the organisation. And although I hesitate to single any group out, I think, particularly as Ruth is wearing the gear, I think we should single out the infection prevention and control team for the sterling work they've done across the system. It's been really impressive and they've stepped up to the plate. So Ruth, please pass on my thanks, and I'm sure the Governor's thanks for all the work that you and your team have done.
Sure will, no problem at all.
Thank you. Are we happy to move on then? We'll note the content of that report, and thank you, Andy, for the work that you're doing, and please thank Nikki as well for all the work that she's doing in producing this report.
Thank you.
Kath, we have a paper on proposals for the upcoming elections for the Council of Governors. This sets out a timeline for the process, which I would take that governors have looked at. Are there any questions or concerns anybody wants to raise with Kath, or are we happy to agree that timetable? Everybody happy to agree that timetable? Kath, is there anything you want in addition?
The only thing I would draw Governor's attention to was the point that you made, Sue, and that is that we've got 4 governors coming to the end of their term of office, and because of COVID we've had to shift the elections, so we're a little bit out of sync with the ending of those terms of office. If anybody wants to restand for election, then we're happy to put in place a confidentiality clause, because of course they're not technically governors, which will allow people to keep connected with the council whilst not being a voting member of the group. So if people are happy with that, I think that that's the most pragmatic way forward, and other trusts are doing similar things.
People happy to go along with that? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And then the final paper is, there's a lot of new language with COVID, isn't there? And one of the new phrases is hibernation plans. So this is the hibernation plan for the work of the Council of Governors, which sets out what we've paused and what we've deferred from March going forward, which governors are asked to note. Are you happy to note the content of this report? Lovely. Again, Kath, anything in addition that you want from us?
No, I don't think so. No, we'll work with Peter to make sure that agendas are not overburdened and take a pragmatic view.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That concludes the formal public Council of Governors meeting. The agenda sets out that the next formal meeting will be the 5th of November, which it will. But on the 10th of September, there will be the board to board, which, if circumstances allow, will be a physical meeting. If not, it'll be a Zoom meeting. But for those who are shielding, you can still Zoom in, and detail will be sent in due course for that. But for now, if I could ask the executives, the non-executives, and Andy and Wendy, thank you very much for your contribution. You're now free to go. Governors and the corporate governance team, if you would stay on the line, that would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.